Is the Conservative campaign in turmoil? Will the Liberals lose a candidate with Liberation Day almost here? This is Now You Know. I'm Rob Snow.
All the news you need to know.
This is Now You Know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
The second week of the federal election campaign is underway. And both the Liberals and the Conservative campaign have their issues. For the Conservatives, it's about trailing the Liberals in the polls and infighting. And for the Liberals, it's about troubling remarks from one of their candidates and the leader's defense of that candidate. Let's start with the Liberals. Mark Carney was in Vaughan, Ontario today in the northern part of the Greater Toronto area, making a housing announcement. He said a re-elected Liberal government would double the pace of new home construction with $25 billion worth of public financing. But news reporters on the Carney tour wanted to know why the Liberal leader hasn't dumped the party's candidate in the riding of Markham-Unionville, Paul Chang, who suggested that supporters turn over a Conservative candidate to the Chinese consulate in Toronto so they could collect a bounty on the Conservative candidate's head. The Conservative candidate's name is Joe Tay. He's actually running in the riding of Don Valley North. Carney said today he still supports his candidate despite the remarks because of Chang's decades of experience working in the community.
Look, the comments were deeply offensive. This is a terrible lapse of judgment by Mr. Chang. He has apologized for those comments. He has apologized directly now to the person that he mentioned, apologized directly to him yesterday. I've spoken to Mr. Chang as well over the course of the weekend to understand his position. He is a veteran policeman. Mr. Chang is a veteran policeman with more than a quarter century of service to his community. 28 years of defending rights in this community, and he will continue with his candidacy going forward, having made those apologies very clearly to the individual, to the community, and moving forward to serve.
While Carney may want to move on from this issue, reporters aren't letting him off the hook.
How can he be an effective representative for them when they no longer trust him after he said this? The question, as you know, Mr. Carney, you know that Canada has executed 4 Canadians this year.
China.
You know that there are human rights activists in China in detention right now. How can Mr. Chang, how can your party keep him as a candidate knowing this context?
Mr. Chang has apologized for his comments. It's a lapse of judgment. He apologized he's apologized for his comments. He's apologized directly to me. He's apologized directly to the individual. He has a long record of service. He's going to continue his candidacy.
An NDP candidate who has been harassed by Chinese state authorities is Jenny Kwan. She called the Liberal candidate's remarks astounding.
That cannot be acceptable. That is intimidation at its worst. And yet, he played right into it. He advocated for people to bring him to the Chinese consulate to collect the bounty. In what universe is this normal? And especially in the face of Canada, where we're faced with foreign interference, active, sophisticated foreign interference activities targeting Canada's democratic institutions.
The riding of Markham-Unionville is a very large Chinese-Canadian population. About 66% of the voters in that riding are of Chinese heritage. The Conservative campaign is in Atlantic Canada today. Pierre Poilievre did an event today in St. John, New Brunswick, and he'll host a rally this evening in Fredericton. During his campaign stop in St. John, Poilievre was promoting energy corridors to speed up federal infrastructure projects like pipelines. St. John was supposed to be the endpoint of the doomed Energy East pipeline. News reporters at that event, however, had more questions about reports of turmoil in the Conservative Party after a top advisor to Ontario Premier Doug Ford said the Conservatives will lose the election campaign because they're not focused enough on the threats from Donald Trump. Today, Poilievre dismissed such criticism.
Some people have said that I should stop talking about the doubling housing costs that have denied an entire generation the chance to own a home after the lost Liberal decade. They say that we shouldn't be debating why single moms are lined up at food banks in record numbers after the lost Liberal decade. They suggest that we shouldn't debate why 50,000 of our citizens have lost their lives to drug overdoses under the radical Liberal drug policies. That we should just forget that after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, that we should just ignore all of those things. I disagree. My purpose in politics is to restore Canada's promise.
The U.S. president will again play a big role in our election campaign this week. Donald Trump has been calling this coming Wednesday Liberation Day. That's when we expect to hear more about tariffs on Canadian exports to the United States. This was Trump yesterday, speaking with news reporters aboard Air Force One.
The tariffs will be far more generous than those countries were to us, meaning they will be kinder than those countries were to the United States of America over the decades. They ripped us off like no country's ever been ripped off in history. And we're going to be much nicer than they were to us, but it's substantial money for the country, nevertheless.
On the tariffs that you're planning, so you're expecting to hit something like 10 to 15 countries, is that right?
No.
All countries? All of the countries. Is it across the board?
Not 10. I don't know. Who told you 10 or 15 countries?
Well, we heard that. So we heard that you were going to aim for the 15%.
But you didn't hear it from me.
Okay, so how many countries will be in that initial tranche?
You'd start with all countries, so let's see what happens. There are many countries.
On the Russian...
I haven't heard a rumor about 15 countries, 10 or 15.
So you're starting with all countries?
Well, essentially, all of the countries that we're talking about. Wouldn't be talking about all countries. That's not a cutoff.
Within the hour, we expect to hear from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. He's campaigning on the West Coast today, doing an event in Victoria, British Columbia. Recent polls suggest support for the NDP is in the single digits, the party on track for its worst election result since 1993. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
You have questions.
Now You Know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
Let's dig a little more into this day on the hustings. As we mentioned, both the Liberal and Conservative campaigns are having to deal with their own issues. For the Liberals, the big headache are ill-advised comments from one of their candidates in a riding with a large Chinese-Canadian population, Markham Unionville. The Liberal candidate's name is Paul Chang, and he suggested that someone pick up the Conservative candidate from another riding, Joe Tay, and take him to the Chinese consulate in Toronto because the Chinese government has a bounty that could be collected. No kidding. He really said that. And this is something that has been in the news for days now, and many people are watching and wondering why the Liberals haven't dumped this candidate. And then today, the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, was doing an event in Vaughan, Ontario, defended his candidate, and said he still has his support and his candidacy will continue. Let's listen to this exchange between one of the news reporters following the Liberal campaign and Mark Carney. This was in Vaughan, Ontario today.
Mr. Carney, I'd like to press you a little bit more on Paul Chang. He lives in a riding that is 70% diverse, people of color. Half of that are people of Chinese ethnic origin, and of that population, about 20% are from mainland China. The question that people from Hong Kong have asked me to ask is whether or not you are putting appeal to those voters who may support the policies of China ahead of the democratic rights and safety of dissidents who have called Canada home, and mainly Hong Kong democracy activists who now live in Mr. Chang's riding?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Stand foursquare for rights, foursquare for our position, our very strong position vis-a-vis China, respect for Canadian citizens, all rights of Canadian citizens, irrespective of whether they hold dual citizenship or not, to be absolutely clear. And Mr. Chang has long history of service to that community, history of protecting those rights. Mr. Chang is well aware of these issues, including having family in Hong Kong.
How can he be an effective representative for them when they no longer trust him after he said this? The question, as you know, Mr. Carney, you know that Canada has executed 4 Canadians this year.
China.
You know that there are human rights activists in China in detention right now. How can Mr. Chang, how can your party keep him as a candidate, knowing this context?
Mr. Chang has apologized for his comments. It's a lapse of judgment. He apologized for he's apologized for his comments. He's apologized directly to me. He's apologized directly to the individual. He has a long record of service. He's going to continue his candidacy.
So that continues to be a problem for Mark Carney and the Liberals, but the Conservatives are having their own issues because the news media is filled with stories and columns about turmoil in the Conservative campaign. Jenny Byrne is the campaign director for the Conservatives, and she's coming under a lot of heat and fire for her handling of the campaign so far. One of the people who's most outspoken is a fellow by the name of Corey Teneycke. Now, Teneycke worked for Stephen Harper when Harper was prime minister, and so did Jenny Byrne. They know each other. Teneycke now is most closely associated with Doug Ford, the Ontario premier, because Teneycke ran back-to-back election campaigns for Doug Ford. Doug Ford won all 3 of them. And Teneycke thinks the Poilievre campaign is off the rails, not hitting the right messages, and that it should be a lot more focused on Donald Trump. And he predicts the Conservatives will lose if they don't change things up. This was put to Poilievre today. He disagrees. Here's a little more of that.
Sir, there are reports on mounting frustrations about how the campaign is going and the trailing polling numbers. What's your plan to turn things around, and will you make changes to the campaign leadership?
Some people have said that I should stop talking about the doubling housing costs that have denied an entire generation the chance to own a home after the lost Liberal decade. They say that we shouldn't be debating why single moms are lined up at food banks in record numbers after the lost Liberal decade. They suggest that we shouldn't debate why 50,000 of our citizens have lost their lives to drug overdoses under the radical Liberal drug policies, that we should just forget that after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, that we should just ignore all of those things. I disagree. My purpose in politics is to restore Canada's promise so that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything. It's hard work. Gets you a great life and a beautiful, affordable home on a safe street, protected by brave troops under a proud flag. All the things that we need to do to respond to the economic aggression of the Americans are things I've been talking about for 10 years. I was standing up for pipelines 10 years ago when Mark Carney was opposing them.
So that was Pierre Poilievre campaigning in St. John, New Brunswick today. So it doesn't sound as though either of these campaigns, Liberal or Conservatives, are going to give an inch on the very news stories that are making more headlines than their policy announcements or their campaign promises. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. This is News Radio.
No question goes unasked or unanswered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow returns on News Radio.
Here with David Smith, and if you're ever looking for a podcast of our show, Now You Know with Rob Snow, we have a new mobile app that will help you hear our show when you want to. Listen live, listen to the podcast. It's called the Seeker app, Seekr. All kinds of exclusive audio that you won't hear anywhere else, news, music, and sports. You can download Seeker for iOS or Android. That's Seeker, spelled Seekr. And Now You Know with Rob Snow is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also download the Seeker app and listen to the Big Story podcast. David's working on a new episode with one of Canada's top pollsters. Who is it, Dave?
Yeah, David Coletto. He's the CEO of Abacus Data, one of the top public opinion research firms in this country. And we're going to talk a bit about what you were just talking about before the break, Rob, and that is the idea that the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre are throwing away this campaign because they aren't pivoting to talk about Trump and only Trump. That's an idea that's been put out there by commentators. We also have, of course, stories over the weekend about the infighting. Headline from the CBC, Conservatives fear dysfunctional campaign, civil war within the party. So they talked to some disaffected campaign staff with the Conservatives. Look, an election campaign is a very stressful time. I'm sure if you talk to staff at a low level in any of the campaigns, you would be able to find people to say they're unhappy with how things are being read or how things are being run. But I think it's an indication that there may be a disconnect between what a lot of us in the media are talking about and what a lot of people who will be voting are actually thinking about. So let me throw one stat at you, and this is sort of the basis for this podcast, the big story that's coming out tomorrow. Donald Trump and the threat of a trade war with the U.S. is the most important election issue for one demographic and one demographic only, and that's people over the age of 60.
Okay.
That's the baby boomer crowd.
Interesting.
For people under the age of 40, housing affordability is much more important than dealing with Donald Trump. And especially so with people between the age of 18 and 29. Whereas housing affordability, making housing more affordable, only 10% of baby boomers tell pollsters that's a top issue of concern in this upcoming election. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is interesting.
We've had so much focus on the Trump tariff news cycle, and yet people are telling the pollsters, younger Canadians especially, it's not actually their top issue of concern. It's well behind reducing the cost of living and reducing the cost of housing specifically.
So David Coletto is sort of throwing this out there as the contrarian opinion, saying, don't give up on that issue. You know, the cost of living and as well the desire for change. That the Liberals have been there for 9.5 years. They've won 3 elections in a row. You hear this from Poilievre. Do they really deserve a 4th term? His latest poll suggests more than half of the electorate has a strong desire for change. They think the country's not going in the right direction. It's time for a new government. So he's sort of making the case, Poilievre might be on the right track here.
Wait it out. A lot of campaign left, more than 20 days.
Yeah, we'll talk about everything that's been going on here early into the second week of the election campaign. Our Newsday panel is coming up next, right after the latest breaking news here on News Radio.
Critical thinking is not dead.
Now you know with Rob Snow.
Returns on News Radio. The Newsday panel.
The gang's all here. It's time for the Newsday panel. Chris Day, Senior Vice President at Hill & Knowlton, back with us. Hello, Chris Day.
Great to join you again. Thank you.
And Cam Holmstrom is Principal at Nipaway Strategies. Welcome back to you as well, Cam. Great to hear from you today.
Great to be here as always.
Well, with the second week of the federal election campaign now underway, the Conservative campaign is reported to be facing infighting, and critics are questioning if the campaign team is hammering away on the right message. There is disagreement about whether the campaign should be focusing more on Trump and less on other issues. Chris Day, what do you think?
So I always take, unnamed sources in the back, the back rooms of campaigns complaining about the campaign manager with giant grains of salt. So until or unless someone has the fortitude to come out and actually put their name to it, then I think that's.
Well, Corey Tenike has put his name to it. Corey Tenike has put his name to it.
He's not in the actual campaign, on a day-to-day level. So what I say is, listen, I look at polls like the one that was out this weekend from our friends at Abacus Data, which clearly shows that when Canadians are asked about whether affordability is a bigger issue to them on a day-to-day, fundamental level versus who can deal with Donald Trump, affordability wins out 58 to 42%. So pocketbook issues are dominant for the vast majority of people in this country. And, I think Pierre and team have been hammering this for the last 2 years because they know that the average person out there is hurting now, was hurting before Donald Trump came on the scene. And the change is the only way that you're going to actually address some of the fundamental issues in the Canadian economy that existed long before Trump 2 was ever back in our reality. So, I think they're starting to do some interesting messaging pivots and elaborations, but they're not losing sight of the fact that 58% of people in this country think affordability is job one.
Okay. Cam, what do you think about this? First of all, I mean, you've been part of campaigns. What do you think about the reports of infighting and turmoil and dysfunction, those kinds of things? Start with that.
Well, first things first. To act as if affordability and Trump are not connected, I think is naive. Because when tariffs come in, that affects affordability right away. So I'll just put that on the table. But honestly, when I looked at, especially, and you mentioned Corey tonight by name, when I saw his quotes that came out in multiple places, I got the distinct feeling of someone who is a member of a team who has tried desperately to go inside and follow normal channels to get a message across just to have it rebuffed and having to say it publicly. Honestly, I think Corey's advice is very good advice for both the blue and the orange teams at this point, because that is the question for everybody. That's what people are moving their vote on. It is Trump. It is all on that. And if you cannot answer that question, they don't listen to you on the rest. That's why Mark Carney is getting a better hearing right now with the public, even if his answers on some of the other issues, frankly, aren't as good. That isn't where people are at. So to me, look, at the end of the day, if you're Mr. Poilievre, if you want to keep hammering on the same thing, banging on the same drum with diminishing return, that's your right. That's your call if you want to do it. But don't be mad when people look at you and say, okay, you're not the one for the moment. To me, the irony is that, and as I kind of said at the start, affordability and Trump are intrinsically linked. If anyone's in a better position to tie those two together, you'd think it'd be the guy who supposedly is polling better on affordability to kind of make up the other end on Trump. But he isn't even trying to do it. So to me, this is a choice that's been made. This is what campaigns are about. It's taking a strategy and sticking to it. I would just argue right now for the Conservatives, and frankly, for the same reason for the NDP, this is why they're in the positions they're in right now. It's not an easy pivot to make. Honestly, this is a tough situation for both these campaigns to be thrown into because there's not a really good answer to the question. But you have to try to answer it because that's what people want to hear.
I mean, sorry, Chris, if you want to jump in there, go ahead.
I mean, you have to look at what they've been doing every single day. I mean, Pierre has been out every single day offering up substantive policy ideas to address both the sort of macroeconomic issues and grow the economy and deal with the Trump threat. While also dealing with affordability issues. I don't think it's an either or. I think Cam's right on that. But, if you look at some of the substantive differences between the types of policies that Pierre is putting out and the types of policies that Mr. Carney is putting out, one is very much dealing with both, and the other, the housing announcement today, the first part of the housing announcement that Mark Carney did this morning was about creating a new housing agency, which is more bureaucracy over homes. Like the two visions for what the two prescriptions for what needs to happen here could not be more stark.
But Chris, I would point out that the prescription I'm hearing from Mr. Poilievre is the exact same thing he's been pitching since he first got elected in 2004. The only new thing I've heard from him policy-wise was the whole piece on TFSAs. That was relatively new. Otherwise, It's been trying to shoehorn what he already wants to do inside this moment. And again, I don't think
the capital gains allowance stuff, all of this stuff.
But hold on. But what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, it's not about the policy piece. It really isn't. It's about who's got the best temperament, best ability to do it. And honestly, that's where Carney has the resume advantage. And the other parties have to match that somehow. I don't know how they do it, but they have to, because that's what people are looking at. It's even less about the specific policy prescription.
Okay.
Trust me,
Or maybe another issue takes over, and maybe it's foreign interference, and maybe it's the Liberals defending a candidate who suggested an opponent be kidnapped and taken to the Toronto consulate so people could collect a bounty. And that's what I want to talk about next. I mean, this is the craziest story of the election campaign so far, if you ask me. It's our Newsday panel with Chris Day from Hill and Knowlton and from Deep Away Strategies, Cam Holmstrom. I mean, it's things you really can't believe you're reading them when you're reading them, that a Liberal candidate would suggest to a conservative rival that he be picked up, taken to the Toronto consulate so that a bounty, the person who does that could collect a bounty on the Conservative candidate. Said the Conservative candidate has done human rights work in Hong Kong, pro-democracy work in Hong Kong, so the Chinese authorities would like to get their hands on this guy. So Mark Carney has been under a lot of pressure. There's been calls for him to dump this candidate in the riding of Markham Unionville. This is what it sounded like at his news event in Vaughan, Ontario, today's campaign event.
How can he be an effective representative for them when they no longer trust him after he said this? The question, as you know, Mr. Carney, you know that Canada has executed 4 Canadians this year.
China.
You know that there are human rights activists in China in detention right now. How can Mr. Chang, how can your party keep him as a candidate knowing this context?
Mr. Chang has apologized for his comments. It's a lapse of judgment. He apologized for he's apologized for his comments. He's apologized directly to me. He's apologized directly to the individual. He has a long record of service. He's going to continue his candidacy.
So what is this, the third day of this now? When it could have been dealt with as soon as it was learned, and it would have been a news story for 5 hours, maybe, and yet it here it is, and it's not going away. Cam Holmstrom, your thoughts on this, please.
Well, first off, this is just a dumb mistake by Carney. Like, seriously, this is a layup. Like, to me, this isn't an apologize, learning situation kind of thing. Like, this is serious, right? The fact of the matter is that you can't joke about stuff like that, because people are being renditioned by the Chinese on bounty being taken abroad. Like, we've seen reporting on this plenty of times. So to me, this wasn't a simple situation of, oh, he's kidding, I apologize and go home. The only thing I can think here is that eventually Mr. Carney is going to have to do the right thing. The pressure will build because he hasn't done it right the first time. Will this come back and bite them in the rear? I don't know, because honestly, the one thing I struck me with the first week of this campaign, all the usual stuff that would become a story that would bite someone in the back end hasn't so far. So I would just hope that the Carney Liberals would realize that situation of last week, that's the abnormal one. Don't count on that going on, especially if the story punches through. And by not dealing with this right first time, well, now you're giving it more time for it to punch through.
I mean, there's an old line in the communications game: try to figure out how the story is supposed to end and get there first. This story is supposed to end with this person not on the ballot for the Liberals. And it seems Mark Carney's doing everything to get there last. What do you think about this, Chris?
I mean, you're bang on. Issues management 101 is get to the end point and work as quickly as possible and work your way back. The end point is that this person, lack of judgment, whatever, terrible mistake, whatever, apology not accepted, whatever. Paul, he's got to resign, and or Mark Carney has to fire him. The fact that he hasn't is bewildering, and I don't know if it's something bigger or what. I cannot imagine why it is not going to the obvious end point here. But ultimately, this is punching through. This is punching through for people who have family in Hong Kong and family in China and people who have known people.
Well, there's certainly a lot of those in Markham Unionville.
Well, this is it, right? This is all the more bewildering that there are people who have had their family members or loved ones threatened, locked up,
intimidated.
Worse.
Yeah,
absolutely. And saying that this is all just a learning or teachable moment for all of us just harkens back to the worst sort of instincts of the previous Liberal leader, where their teachable moments were all over the place, and there wasn't actually anything of substance done. It also raises a whole series of questions about foreign interference and the presence of certain diplomatic factions or non-diplomatic factions, however you want to look at it, in the Chinese consulate and embassy system here in this country. It speaks to a whole bunch of things that, frankly, Liberals probably don't want to talk about.
Right.
And yet this is dragging it out day after day after day.
Plus, they've managed to turn this whole foreign interference thing into a sword issue more than a shield issue, and really go after Pierre Poilievre on his lack of security clearance. And with this, they're kind of surrendering this as even an issue. They'll have no credibility on this issue, to me, Cam. Let's get a comment from Cam. Yeah.
And the kicker is, it would be so easy to just have done the right thing the first time. Like this isn't like a real gray zone issue. What you should do. This is real black and white, right? And Mr. Carney, of all people, with his world experience, knows the issues we've had with China. We talk about the two Michaels. You can talk about what they've done abroad in other places. Like, Mark Carney's enough of a person of the world to know that, right? So to me, this would have been a very easy way to come and just reinforce that and drive it home, right? Especially when you know somewhere else along the line, someone else is going to have a candidate who's going to need to be fired, right? And if it's not a Liberal, let's say it's a Tory, all of a sudden now they have a built-in excuse. Well, you wouldn't fire this guy. Why should I fire that guy?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And then round and round we go.
Yeah. Okay. We'll be right back. We'll talk about Liberation Day. How does Wednesday impact the election campaign? When we come back on News Radio. With Chris Day and Cam Holmstrom, our Newsday panelists today, I'm Rob Snow. How do you think, Chris Day, Donald Trump's Liberation Day on Wednesday, more tariffs, could impact the election campaign?
I wish I had the crystal ball to know exactly what we're looking at, because every time we talk about tariffs, or every time, more to the point, the president talks about tariffs, there's a completely different version of what's coming telegraphed. And it seems like the administration is still trying to figure out what it's going to look like. I think it's in a very different state than it, we may have been looking at even just a couple of months ago, in that I think there's going to be some level of global application of tariffs to some degree. Kind of like what we saw sort of intonated with auto, right? It's the entire world. It's not just Canada, not just Canada-Mexico.
Okay.
And whether or not it's 25% or 5 or 10, like, that's where it's going to make a real difference. And that's where we'll see different levels of hurt, depending on the rate and the application of it.
Okay. How do you see Donald Trump's Liberation Day on Wednesday impacting the election campaign, Cam?
It'll make an impact. It'll impact some of the conversation that happens. Honestly, if it's not as bad, I can see the Carney Liberals trying to take credit for it. If it's just as bad as the others, I can see the opposition parties trying to pile on. Like, it's going to be what it's going to be. But like kind of as Chris alluded to, like, that's going to be Wednesday. What's Friday going to be like? What's going to happen next Wednesday? What's going to happen at 1 a.m. on Sunday morning?
But couldn't it be, if I could just interrupt, Cam, if I could just interrupt, could it not be a kind of a repeat of last week where Carney, interrupts his campaign? He's not the Liberal leader anymore, and he goes into prime minister mode, and, I have to have a meeting with the premiers, and, I have to have a news conference in front of the lectern with all the flags and talk about what my government is doing now, which you would think gives a distinct advantage to him over his rivals, right?
Yeah, and that's the advantage of being the incumbent in this circumstance, right? And yeah, depending on what it is, I would say it's more likely that's going to happen than anything else. But I guess my bigger point is that when it comes on the grand scale of the election, like, we still do have almost a full month to go. And in those remaining 26 days, just think of the number of things that Donald Trump could drop on us. Because whenever he's dropped something like this, even if it hasn't been as bad, there's always been something that's come a couple days later, right? Or even 24 hours later, but just kind of knocks that off the page and then on to the next worst thing. So this is just living with Trump. So, yeah, I think that's all baked in at this moment when it comes to how we deal with it. It just remains to be seen what the details are.
Okay, we'll wrap it up there for today. It's great to hear from both of you. Always enjoy your insight. Only 28 days left to go. I hope we get to talk a few more times between now and then. My goodness, this is an epic election campaign. Really appreciate your insight.
Anytime, Rob.
So much.
Thanks, appreciate it.
That's Chris Day, Senior Vice President at Hill and Knowlton, has worked with cabinet ministers on the Hill in the past. And Cam Holmstrom, Principal at Nipa Way Strategies, a longtime supporter of the New Democrats, has worked for people like Jack Layton and Charlie Angus as well, but has been quite critical, as have a lot of people of the NDP campaign thus far. Okay, when we come back, it'll be Talkback, and we want to talk about this second week of the election campaign and where things stand. We would love to hear from you. Our phone lines are open, well, right now. 1-833-668-2577 is our call-in line. You can get a line right now and take your call pretty much right away and right off the top. 2 hours of debate and discussion on the big news stories of the day, and the election campaign is the biggest news story in this country. So let's talk about it right after the news on Talkback on News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Welcome to Talkback. 2 hours of debate and discussion on the big issues of the day. Today, second week of the federal election campaign, now well underway. Leaders are kind of spread across the country today. The Liberal leader, Mark Carney, was in southern Ontario. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, campaigning in New Brunswick. He had an event in St. John. He's having a rally in Fredericton today. And the NDP leader right now, Jagmeet Singh, is in Victoria, British Columbia. What's your take on the race so far, everyone? Who do you think is winning? Why do you think they're winning? Almost all the polls give the edge to the Liberals. If that is indeed the case, why do you think that's the case? One of the big news stories in the last few days has been about infighting, turmoil in the Conservative campaign. You have high-power Conservatives who don't think the Conservative campaign is going very well, isn't focused on the right messages. The right message being Trump, 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 tariffs, 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 Trump, 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 Trump. And the critics are saying the Conservatives are just spending too much time talking about all kinds of other stuff, doing policy announcements and attacking Mark Carney and the Liberals and not going after the Trump issue enough. What do you think of that? Do you think that's true? We have reports, Conservative campaign in disarray, not talking enough about the right issues. What is the most important issue? That's another one that's out there. 1-833-668-2577. Should save that number in your phone. 1-833-668-2577. And another big story is the Liberal campaign refusing to dump a candidate who suggested that a rival be kidnapped and taken to the Chinese consulate in Toronto so someone could collect a bounty. There's a bounty on one of the Conservative candidates' heads because they've fought for democracy in Hong Kong, and Chinese authorities would love to get that guy back in China. And the Liberal candidate said, you should take him to the consulate. He has apologized, and today Carney defended his candidate, and he's not going anywhere. 1-833-668-2577. Let's talk about the campaign today. Rick in Dartmouth. Hello, Rick. You're up first today. Hi, Rick.
Look,
Hi.
To me, the most important thing of the election campaigns is the carbon tax, and
carbon tax.
It's,
okay.
Obviously, been reduced by Mark Carney's government there. But the Liberals have a philosophical, an ideological bent on the carbon tax, and I don't see any reason to think that after basically 6 years of the Conservatives saying to get rid of the tax and the Liberals just looking at it as the greatest thing ever, and Mark Carney being the greatest proponent of the carbon tax, that if they should form a majority government, I'm pretty sure that it would be very tempting for them to bring it back. And the analogy I use is, one group says the carbon tax is great and keeps punching the people in the face, and the other people say the carbon tax is not great and stop punching the people in the face. And then an election turns up, and so they temporarily do it. I don't trust Mark Carney regarding this issue one little bit because it is ideological.
Well, I mean, the carbon tax was supposed to go up tomorrow. It will be set to zero as of tomorrow. And as of tomorrow, I read a news story today. Gas prices in your part of the country could go down 20 cents a liter.
No,
tomorrow.
They won't.
No,
they won't, Rob. I'll tell you why. Is the Utility and Review Board here made an announcement that our news director here, Dan Alstrand, didn't even catch. And the announcement was that the carbon tax will not be removed in order to protect the gas companies that have already paid the tax, which sounds fair to me. So it'll be sort of a few days, a few weeks before it's actually.
A few days or weeks. Okay, that's interesting because you would think it would be, beneficial to the Liberals to have gas prices go down 20 cents a liter during the election. I'm going to be interested to see what happens with gas prices tomorrow because they've actually been on the rise in recent weeks ahead of the elimination of the carbon tax. But
the idea is to get them up to where,
well, maybe. I don't know, Rick, but thank you for your call. Anyway, I want to take another call here from Halifax, and we have some lines available there, 1-833-668-2577. Dave is in Halifax. Hi there, Dave.
Hi there, and thank you for taking my call, Rob.
You're welcome,
listen,
Dave.
I'm over 60, and I heard your polling numbers there, where over 60 is more concerned, I think, about Trump and the tariffs.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really care. I do care, but that's not my concern. I'm more concerned about what I see around my fair city here, where you have an abundance of mental health issues, homeless, record-setting food bank lineups, middle income in that as well, I might add.
Okay.
And to me, that's the number one thing that I'm concerned about. Housing, my two sons just bought, if you're familiar with Halifax, houses $500,000 for fix-me-up homes in Halifax. So housing,
that's crazy.
The economy, yes, we are going to probably pay a price for the tariffs, but right now we don't see that. It's not affecting us at the moment. What has affected us is 4 years to 10 years, whatever you want to call it, of poor leadership that's put us in the gutter at the moment. And myself, I don't think Carney's the guy that's going to get us out of this at all, quite frankly. I almost hope he does get in and they can face the responsibility of how they've damaged this country. It's going to take a lot of work to get us back up to snuff.
So there's a lot of, the infighting or turmoil that has apparently taken over the conservative campaign is he's not focused enough on Trump, and Poilievre defended his stance saying, look, what about all of these other things? Many of them that you cite, lineups at food banks, cost of living, homelessness, You don't think Poilievre should give up on talking about stuff like that? Is that what you're saying?
It's a great deterrent is what it is. Yes, of course he should as well.
Okay.
But let's just wait to see right now. I think also I will add those 4 Canadian nationals that were in China that were executed under the Liberal government is astonishing. I've just started heard a little bit more and more about that, and hopefully you guys can enhance on how and why. I know it was about drugs. Apparently, they were caught allegations of drugs, but it could go deeper. But those are Canadian citizens, and what I heard about what was going on about the Liberal fellow, I don't know the name, you've got it there, that mentioned the bounty on the head of shameful. I mean, really. But to me, I'm astonished that we would lose 4 of our citizens in China without even a fight or anything going on. I heard nothing about this under the Liberal government.
All right. Okay. Gotta go.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
The second week of the election campaign now well underway. Let me run down the latest polling. Abacus data And David is going to be interviewing David Coletto from Abacus Data for the Big Story podcast, doing that interview today, a little later today. Abacus Data says it's a tie. Liberals 39, Conservatives 39, NDP at 11. Nanos, however, has the Liberals up by 7. Liberals 43, Conservatives 36, NDP 10. Main Street has the Liberals up by 2, 42 to 40, NDP at 7. Liaison Strategies, Liberals up by 4, 42 to 38, the NDP at 7. And over at 338, which calculates an average of all the polls, it's Liberals by 5. Liberals 42, Conservatives 37, NDP at 9. And 338 says, with numbers like that, the Liberals have a 99% chance of winning the most seats right now, here with the second week of campaigning underway, and an 89% chance of winning a majority government. That's kind of the way things stand here on a Monday. Scott in Kitchener up next. Hello, Scott.
Robbie, how are you?
I'm good, Scott. Thank you.
Beautiful.
What do you think?
So
Looks good.
Who do I think? I applaud Poilievre for staying the course. Like,
okay,
this stuff with the free trade or with the tariffs and all this really has meant nothing to Canadians over the past 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And he's focusing on the issues. Everybody else should be focused on the issues too over the past how many years, not something that's just transpired here. Like,
okay,
it blows my mind. It's the same party. You know, Carney was wooed by Trudeau before he even resigned to come join the party. You know, he's handpicked, he's selected, he's installed. He's not voted in by anyone anywhere.
Well, he was voted in by Liberal supporters, supporters of the Liberal
supporters,
Party.
And then
right.
they kicked out somebody out of their seat and gave him that seat. You know,
that's true.
It's the same. And has China not imposed more tariffs? Like, why is nobody saying a word about China here in the last how long here? China's imposed a pile of tariffs again on Canada.
Yeah, on agriculture, on $1 billion worth of seafood from Atlantic Canada. Really tough.
Kidding. Like, I don't. Where's nobody talking about that, or like what's?
Yeah, very interesting.
It's the popular. It's the typical liberal stuff. It's the popular. It's the popular thing on everybody's mind, I think, and everybody's following right behind the liberal garbage.
But your suggestion would be for Poilievre to stay the course, and he doesn't have to obsess about Trump. Is that what you're saying?
Don't obsess about him. It's another problem, but we were facing a boatload of problems before the tariffs came along, and that's why we wanted to change before this happened.
Okay, interesting.
You know what I mean? Why?
Yeah.
I don't understand. He's not he's nobody. He was selected. He was installed. He was voted by the Liberal Party.
Right.
Yep,
well,
sure, that's cool, but
but he's also maybe 28 days away from becoming prime minister if things stay the same.
Well,
but you're saying
that
maybe
happens, if that happens, sorry to interrupt you, but if that happens, I think it's not going to be long. It's the carbon tax is going to be reinstated again or brought in another way. What are your thoughts? What do you think? What do you think? And yourself, Rob Snow. What's Rob Snow think?
Well, I think that if this comes to pass, it's going to go down as one of the greatest political comebacks in the history of Canada, if not the greatest comeback in Canadian political history. Is it going to be a good
thing, in your opinion, Rob, for Canada?
Well, I would not support the Liberals because I would never vote for any party that has Gerald Butts as part of the show. Like I've seen that guy's act twice. Okay, he was part of the Liberal government in Ontario, and I was living in Ontario, and it was not a good time to be in Ontario under McGuinty and Wynne, and Gerald Butts was all over that. And then when Trudeau came to power in 2015, Gerald Butts was, he was one of the main architects of that 2015 election win, and I just. When I see Gerald Butts associated with a campaign, I run in the other direction. That's just me.
That's what I agree. Like I don't understand. Can I ask one more question for you?
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
What the hang else was I going to say? Oh, I can't remember now.
All right, must have been a lie. We'll have to move along. Got to move along. Look, there's an old line that says a week is a lifetime in politics. We still have 4 weeks or 4 lifetimes left to go. But it's advantage Liberals right now. Love to hear from you. We're talking about the election again today on Talkback. Karen in Calgary. Karen, up next. Hi, Karen.
Rob, how you doing?
Good, Karen. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good. I have a couple of points. One point is, look at the number of people showing up to Pierre's rally. He's got to be doing something right.
Okay.
If they didn't want to hear his message, they wouldn't show up.
True enough.
My perspective is Mr. Ford wants to run as prime minister, so he has to kick Pierre to the curb in order to get leadership of the party.
Okay.
That's why he's upset, because he wants Pierre to fail so Rob Ford can roll into the Conservative Party and be the hero.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion. As with regard to Mr. Carney, he does not have to campaign because this election will be handed to him, just like everything else. This Chinese interference, where's that gone? Nowhere. Okay? Nobody's saying anything about Chinese interference. He doesn't have to campaign. He just has to roll in, and all these Chinese people and all their cohorts will vote for him now because he's sticking up for Chinese. That's why he hasn't said anything about tariffs.
I don't know. I think you may be badly misreading that. I think this is a major mistake by the Liberals. They're badly mishandling this.
I do too. But we just got to capitalize on it because this guy thinks he has no problem. One other thing I heard on the weekend you guys might want to investigate is Mr. Carney's Brookfield prepaid Jared Kushner $1 billion on a building for the 99-year lease. He prepaid the rent in 2018.
That's out there. That Brookfield has done business with real estate business with Jared Kushner.
How do we trust that guy? He's a snake oil salesman.
Brookfield was involved in helping Elon Musk buy Twitter. All of these things have been well documented and reported, but doesn't seem to matter right now. Long way to go yet, of course. Well, he's not being placed in. He's going to have to fight for every last vote.
Okay.
And
so
right
the Chinese show up and he's a winner. Sorry, Rob. That's my opinion on that.
Well, okay. Yeah, that might be a factor it might be a factor in a few ridings, but there are a lot of people who are living in Canada because they don't want to live in China. And they don't want their families in China harassed by the Chinese state authorities. Okay, thank you for your call, Karen. I'm going to move along.
See you, Rob.
Wayne in Calgary. Wayne, up first. Hi there, Wayne. Hello, Wayne.
Couple of points. One is Trump. These polls come out who can best manage Trump. And I chuckle at those polls because I don't think anybody can manage Trump. I don't think he's a logical person. So I don't think Carney or Pierre Poilievre would be better suited to manage Trump. I don't think anybody is.
Yeah, but it's not in politics. There's an old line in politics: reality doesn't matter. It's the perception of reality that matters. And right now, most people perceive that Mark Carney would be better than Poilievre at that.
Fair enough. You know, any other election, if the Conservatives had 38% of the popular vote as shown in the polls, they'd stand a pretty good chance on winning. I really think this is two issues here, and I'll make them quick. Number one is back in 92-93 when the Conservatives split and the Bloc was formed in Quebec. That has cost the Conservatives to this day. I mean, when you split the Conservative vote in Quebec, and they're only winning 9 seats in all of the province of Quebec, it's very difficult for the Conservatives to win a majority government.
Make your second point very quick. Very quick.
Okay, and then the other one is the NDP blew it. The NDP vote is going to the Liberals, and they should have called an election or stopped way back in October. That's it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Exactly right, Wayne. Yeah, you nailed it, my friend. Be right back. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Want to bring in the latest from the campaign before we just fit in another call here. Just be patient. A couple of lines available. Been quieter than it has been during the first week of the campaign. 1-833-668-2577. Lots of time to take your call. Love to get your take on the second week and where things stand right now. So the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, was in British Columbia today, Victoria, and he was going after the fossil fuel industry, the big polluters, saying the NDP would eliminate subsidies and tax breaks for oil and gas companies. NDP says that would save $18 billion over 10 years, and it would put that into a major home retrofit program. That the NDP would retrofit 3.3 million homes with energy-saving upgrades, cutting energy bills by up to $4,500 a year for families across Canada, would help Canadians pay for things like heat pumps, construction materials, boosting local manufacturing, creating thousands of good union jobs in things like installation, auditing, and retrofitting, and that it would work through partnerships with colleges and union trading centers. Quote, "This is how we fight the climate crisis and protect Canadians from the effect of Trump's trade war at the same time." Now, as we've been telling you, it's not going well in NDP land. Historically low polling numbers, on track to win maybe a half a dozen seats. Mr. Singh was asked if that's the result on election night and the NDP loses, will he step down as NDP leader? Let's listen to this.
I'm curious about your own benchmark for success. If your party loses seats in this election, if you lose your own seat, will you step down?
My focus in this campaign is on what's in front of us, which is the serious threat of Donald Trump. And the question in this election is, who's going to be in it for you in that fight? Who's going to make you and your family the priority when you're worried about the threats to our economy, the threats to our jobs, the threat to our very sovereignty? And in the future negotiations that might take place, who's going to make sure they stand up for you and your family? Not someone that's going to make concessions to appease the billionaires, but someone that's going to say, you know what? Healthcare will never be on the table. Our environment will never be on the table. Our workers, our way of life will never be on the table. That's New Democrats. That's who you can count on.
So, Mr. Singh never really answered the question, did he? Whether this is his last go at it. This is his third election campaign, but it's the second week of the campaign. What do you think about the race? 1-833-668-2577. Wayne in Calgary up next. Hi, Wayne.
Hi there, Rob.
Hi, Wayne.
I just don't. I watch the news now on some of the major networks, and I get the same feeling that I did when the Calgary Flames and Edmonton Oilers used to, play in their heyday. I want to throw things at the TV. I get so upset about some of the issues and about what I perceive as people not paying attention to.
Okay.
Things like Carney's Brookfield connections to the Trumps, to Kushner, to all. I think we need to look in a little bit more to the connections that he has to China with what's recently been going on. This guy does not pass the smell test.
Okay.
But the most infuriating part of this is that not only does he pass the smell test, but it seems that people and the mainstream media particularly are ignoring a lot of this stuff or giving him a pass on it, and I don't get it. I just don't get it. And I'm a senior. I'm almost 70 years old, and I look at some of the polling and saying that seniors are only concerned about the Trump issue, and that's why the Conservatives are having so much trouble with that particular demographic. I don't believe that. I think that since the advent of social media, there's been a lot of polls that have been wrong, and I'm looking at it, and I kind of defer to one of your other earlier callers that said, I look at the crowd sizes, and there's something that's askew here in terms of the polling. I think that's right. So
Okay.
At any rate,
All right. Interesting.
I just think that that we need to dig into Carney and a little bit more. And he doesn't pass the smell test when you have people like the British Prime Minister, and yes, she was a conservative, but basically saying that he left, the UK in dust. And they're still struggling as a consequence of net zero policies.
Yeah, if you're talking about Liz Truss, I mean, she was prime minister for 57 days and almost crashed the currency, right? So, not like she has a great record. But look, I've got to run. I want to fit in another call here, Wayne. I've got you. Dig into Carney a little bit more. Is his suggestion? Riley in Rocky View County. Riley.
Hey there, Rob. Can you hear me?
Hi, Riley. Yeah, hear you just fine. Go ahead. What's your opinion?
Hey, Rob. I kind of stand in contrast to a lot of callers here. I'm a young fella. I'm 28 years old. In my adult working life, I've only ever known the federal Liberal government. And as a young guy, I think as I can speak for a lot of my friends, people around me in my life, in my circle, they have done nothing but made things harder. And it's really difficult to see all these people campaign against, Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all these people in the States that are millionaires and they're leading the country and they shouldn't be, right? I think what really tickles me the most is what happened to this whole idea of the government of the people, for the people, by the people, right?
Okay. All right. Well, that's kind of an American thing. It's not really a Canadian thing, but ours is more peace, order, and good government. Okay. But anyway, okay. Right.
Yeah.
You feel there's a lack of accountability or something like that? Is that what you're getting at? Or
within reason, I like Wayne's points there about Carney not passing the sniff test. These crowds are not matching up to these polling numbers at all. There's some that's awfully fishy, kind of going on in the background here. Now, I like to speak from a fairly unbiased opinion. I do agree that Carney, on paper, looking at him, his headshot, he is obviously a very poised individual. He looks well fit for the job. I cannot discredit that. But what I do disagree with, I guess, on the left's platforms here is their hot button talking points, right? These guys, they take every situation that can get people riled up and they run with it. Whereas, I will give Polyev the mark for that guy, like the other caller there said. He's stayed the course. He's kind of held the same viewpoints for the last 2 years.
Okay. Do you think he should stick to that? Do you think he should stick to that?
Yeah, I do.
You do? Okay. All right. Got to run, Riley. Thank you. Thank you. That's our time. Yeah, got to run. Thank you. Bill in Calgary up next. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Rob. How you doing?
I'm good, Bill. Good to hear from you today, sir. What do you think?
I was listening to a financial show down in the States, and they had a young investigative reporter on there that ties back to all this.
Okay.
He says Canada is a powerhouse in the fentanyl. And the way it worked, the way he had it in his book, is the raw product hits the shores of BC. Vancouver and Toronto cook it. They sell it to the cartels, the Mexican cartel and the Chinese triad. They take the money back. They put it into the casinos. The casinos cleared out for them. Then they take it and put it into the housing industry. He says there's over $1 trillion worth of that money in the housing industry. And that's what's causing the pricing of all the houses in Toronto and Vancouver going up the way it is. Now, he's traced this back. He spent 7 years doing this. He's traced this back to China. And he says there's 11 operatives within the GT area that's directly contacted with the People Republic of China. And he's followed it all the way back to Pierre Elliott Trudeau. That's how long it's been there. And they're saying 1%. 1% of the drugs that are coming in, they're checked, but that's not what's going out, Rob. It's in the billions of dollars.
Okay.
And they said, well, aren't you afraid of being sued? And he says, I've got all the numbers. I have all, and he's got the book out, and I think he called it Wishful Blindness or Willful Blindness.
Willful Blindness. Sam Cooper, you're talking about. Sam Cooper.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was on the American show. And you know what? they turned their eye to this damn thing, and this is a bigger problem than we realize.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sam Cooper has been all over that issue of China and the influence and infiltration of Chinese agents in Canada. I mean, for a long, long time. He used to be with Global News, and now he does his own thing.
Yes. But he also checked, like, the one guy that all the money was going to here in Canada, amazingly turned up in Panama as a bank. And then this guy was loaning money out there. That's where Trump now has got this guy and is working him out of Panama. Like, I think they're more embedded in the Liberal government than we're aware of.
Okay, very interesting.
Okay,
I want to fit in another call, so I'm going to move along, Bill. But thank you, Jared in Calgary. Up next. Hi, Jared.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey. How's it going?
What are your thoughts, Jared?
So basically, what I've started to realize with Trump and the way he talks and acts is that people need to realize that there's no dealing with him in the tariffs. He's putting tariffs on every single country, and which technically makes the deal with Trump issue kind of irrelevant.
Okay.
And like, if you take out the deal with Trump issue, the Trump factor, then we just have to focus on our priorities here at home and expanding trade to get off the USA.
Okay. But why would it be then that the Liberals have the edge so far, according to all of these polls?
Thinking that we can deal with Trump and maybe avoid the tariffs.
Okay.
The thing is, with Carney doing his business and obviously having relations with the Trumps, but in the end, if Trump is stubborn enough and focused enough to just keep tariffs on everybody, like you said, he wants to go back to the 1890s to 1920s, where the USA just survived off tariffs. There was no income tax.
Right. Okay. So this advice that Poilievre is getting and choosing to ignore, by the way, he dismissed this today. You have to focus more on Trump, and be obsessed about the Trump issue. You don't think that's true?
No, not at all. Because
okay.
We have to listen to what Trump has said repeatedly, and he's acting on those words. So I don't think he's going to budge at all. So there is no dealing with Trump on it.
No dealing with Trump anyway. Okay, interesting, Jared. Thank you. Let's go to George in Calgary. Thank you. George, you're up next. What are you thinking about today, George? Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Just quickly, first off, on the China thing, that gentleman has to step down. I mean, we're Canadians and we don't take kindly to things like that. But anyhow, what I really want to touch on was what Dave mentioned on the voting of the younger generation, 1839, and then the 60 plus, and one with tariffs and the other. He missed the one. I'm curious because the largest voting block is actually the 40 to 59-year-olds. Just some, maybe for the podcast, just give you some quick numbers here. Basically there's about 11.2 million people of 18 to 39, 55% on average vote. So you get about 6.16 million people there. The 40 to 59, there's 10.5 million people there, and you get about 67% that usually vote on average. And so that gives you about 7.04 million people. And then the 60 plus, there's roughly about 7.4 of those, and 75% of them on average vote. So you get 5.55. So really what you're looking at is when Dave talks in the podcast tomorrow is, who does that center vote go to, like the 40 to 59. So
okay. All right.
To bring that up.
Right. Yeah, so the kind of the younger boomers and Gen Xers, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. That's hour number one of Talkback. A full hour just ahead, right after the news on News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
It is the second week of the federal election campaign. We'd love to know what you think about the race so far, who is winning and why. Two big issues on the campaign trail today. following both campaigns around the Liberals and the Conservatives. For the Liberals, it's Mark Carney's refusal to dump a candidate who suggested that a rival Conservative candidate in another riding be dropped off at the Chinese consulate because the Conservative candidate has done work for the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. He has a bounty on his head. And the Liberal candidate said somebody should drop him off at the Toronto consulate and collect that bounty. This has been following the Liberal campaign for days. All kinds of calls for Mark Carney to dump this candidate. Mark Carney doing no such thing today. Let's listen to this. Mark Carney in Vaughan, Ontario today.
How can he be an effective representative for them when they no longer trust him after he said this? The question, as you know, Mr. Carney, you know that Canada has executed 4 Canadians this year.
China.
You know that there are human rights activists in China in detention right now. How can Mr. Chang, how can your party keep him as a candidate knowing this context?
Mr. Chang has apologized for his comments. It's a lapse of judgment. He apologized for he's apologized for his comments. He's apologized directly to me. He's apologized directly to the individual. He has a long record of service. He's going to continue his candidacy.
He's going to continue his candidacy. As for Poilievre and the Conservative campaign, lots of reports of infighting, turmoil. Critics don't think the campaign is focused enough on Trump. Poilievre dismissed those critics today during his campaign event in St. John, New Brunswick.
Some people have said that I should stop talking about the doubling housing costs that have denied an entire generation the chance to own a home after the lost Liberal decade. They say that we shouldn't be debating why single moms are lined up at food banks in record numbers after the lost Liberal decade. They suggest that we shouldn't debate why 50,000 of our citizens have lost their lives to drug overdoses under the radical Liberal drug policies. That we should just forget that after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, that we should just ignore all of those things. I disagree.
That's
my
Pierre
purpose in
Poilievre
politics
today in St. John,
is
New
to
Brunswick.
restore
He disagrees. So it doesn't sound like both campaigns are willing to budge on the issues that are following them around today, whether it's the Liberals or the Conservatives. Your thoughts on the race so far? 1-833-668-2577. Let's go to Emerson. He is calling from Calgary today. Hi, Emerson. You're up next.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for accommodating me. I appreciate it. I just want to say, welcome. I really do believe that Jagmeet Singh is going to be the first time we're going to end up with a two-party system in Canada, because NDP is going to be wiped right off. They're not going to have party status. That's because he was so selfish and greedy, hanging on to power just to accommodate his own personal needs. Now he's going to pay severely for that. His career is going to end in politics. The party is going to be decimated. But I'm going to make one prediction. I've told you this before, and I'm going to come back and tell you again. After the debates in French and English, watch out. The polls are going to shift back to Poilievre. You know why? Carney is not all that in a bag of chips. This guy is basically a puppet, like you say, for butts, for all the people who put him up there. And Trudeau in the background laughing his head off, thinking, oh, you think he got rid of me? Not even close. Because they're ready to give Trudeau a little position in that party afterwards. They're not going to say it now, but Trudeau is going to remain on the payroll. Okay? We as Canadians have to see through this. And Rob, let's be honest. How in the world do you think this is all about Trump? We got an economy to worry about. We got a generation that may never own homes. We got people lined up at food banks that you've never seen. Yes, Trump is a pain in the butt, but he is not the only reason we're calling an election. Wake up, people. We've been complaining for 10 years, and now all of a sudden it's because of Donald Trump. By the way, Donald Trump keeps saying, we had a productive phone call, me and Mark Carney. But guess what? The tariffs stick. Now I'm not budging. How productive is that? Wake up, people. Seriously, wake up.
Wake up and wait for the debates, says Emerson. Okay, thank you, Emerson. To Ryan calling from British Columbia today. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, Rob. I'm a first-time caller.
I appreciate that, sir. Thank you very much. What are your thoughts on the race here?
Just in regards to the polls and the narrative that the mainstream media seems to be wanting to drive, Mr. Cochrane and Barton and gang there, I think they're trying to steer and deflect from the Liberals' track record. What I really think. I think Butts and Telford and gang, they've taken that road, and that's the one they're going to drive. I'm just going to come back to bite them. I don't think the polls are accurate at all. And my hometown of Surrey, British Columbia, you couldn't get another person down the road there the other night for the size of the crowds.
You're talking about the Polyev rally in Surrey. Big crowd, right?
Absolutely.
Like 5,000 people or something like that, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So look, Polyev, you heard him there. He's under a lot of pressure to focus more on Trump and actually focus really only on Trump. What do you think of that advice? He says he's not going to follow that advice. Says he disagrees with it.
The reality is he's mixing it in, and he's going to mix more of it in as he gets going here.
Okay.
But you have to tie the affordability issue with the Trump thing, and I think he's doing that well. To just abandon his platform would be to jump right in the Liberals' wheelhouse, right? And I think he's doing a great job of doing both. I think you're going to see that ramp up, especially as we get towards the debates. And, stay on the affordability stuff, mix in the Trump stuff. And while I'm on the subject here, NDP Jagmeet, he's out here today.
Yes, he is. Yep.
He made a deal with the devil, and it's cost that party probably everything.
Yeah.
And it looks
it's
good
bleak. It's bleak right now for them.
Yeah. So some of that soft vote is definitely went to the Liberals as far as polling.
Sure.
But I think as the campaign gets going here, I think we're going to be in better shape. I'm not worried. I don't.
Not worried. Okay. All right.
Every morning and having coffee in Tim Hortons, and I don't hear one good thing about the Liberals. So.
Okay. All right. Good to hear from you today. Thank you for being a first-time caller. Hope to hear from you again. Week 2 of the federal election campaign. All leaders have had their campaign events now, although Pierre Poilievre has a rally in Fredericton, New Brunswick today. Be curious to see what kind of crowd that he gets out at that rally in Fredericton. That's been one of the stories of this campaign so far, is the size of the rallies at the Poilievre crowd, whether that's indicative of any kind of disconnect between what the polls are saying and these rallies. You may have a thought on that. 1-833-668-2577. 3 lines available there. Love to hear from you today. Robert in Cochrane is up next. Hi, Robert.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for taking my call, and thanks
You're
for
welcome.
what you do.
Thank you.
So here's
Appreciate
my
that.
thoughts. I
Okay.
think, when it comes to Carney, this man comes with a reputation. Some say good, some say bad, but he's not a stranger. So he's a familiar face. So he's not when you get a new guy, everybody's watching the new guy. Well, he's able to kind of, I think, stick handle through this because of his experience. At the same time, Mr. Poilievre, he's a little haggard right now, and I think he's still our man, and I think this country desperately needs a change in government. So don't misunderstand this, but I think Pierre's a little haggard. He's been campaigning, unlike Carney, who's been campaigning for 2 weeks. Poilievre's been campaigning hard for 4, 5, 6 years, and he's really been, beating down the same path. And I think it would be good for him if he was to freshen up his campaign a little bit. I know, what he's trying to bring forward are valid and important to this country, but I think he's just coming off a little bit tired. And so perhaps people are starting to wonder if he's too burnt out.
I think he might be burnt out. Is he coming across when you watch him or you listen to him lately? Does he sound a little more low energy to you?
You know what? It's a little bit like listening to the same recording, but at the end of the day, Poilievre is also a very monotone person. He doesn't really have a high end or a low end. He's kind of always right in the middle. So I think you have to understand him. But the problem that I see is that maybe people are saying, yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's been the same platform. You've been doing it for 6 years. I just think it might help if he could find a way to increase the energy behind his, his campaign, behind his followers and his believers, excite the party a little bit. It's semantics for sure.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Yep, good to hear from you today. Robert out in Cochrane. I think for the Conservatives, I mean, there are reasons to be hopeful. There are reasons to be concerned. I think one of the reasons for the optimism is that it's still close. It's still close. You have one poll out today that says it's a tie. You have others that say the Conservatives are behind, but not by much. Some say 2 points, 4 points. I mean, some of these polls are within the margin of error. Another reason to be optimistic, to Emerson's point, 28 days to go and 2 leaders' debates. And Pierre Poilievre's a great debater. And certainly it's going to be a snake pit for Mark Carney in the French leaders' debate. He'll have the worst French of all the candidates that are going to be taking to the stage in Montreal on the 16th. Poilievre, Blanchet, of course, Sink, they all have a better command of the French language than Mark Carney does. And I think another reason to be, if you're a Conservative supporter, to be hopeful about where things stand right now are these rallies. To Ryan's point, who was talking about the rally in Surrey, British Columbia, getting big crowds. 4,000 people show up in North York. 5,000 people come out in Surrey. They had 3,500 in Winnipeg. It shows commitment from your supporters. It shows the ability to mobilize. And mobilization, once the polls open, advance polls and on voting day, you need to be able to mobilize people and know that people are motivated to turn out and vote for your candidate on election night. That's when everything is going to switch to what they call the ground game. So there are reasons to be optimistic if you're a supporter of the Conservatives, but there are reasons to be concerned as well. And among the reasons to be concerned are that these top-line polling numbers from these firms, they don't really tell the whole story. Okay, so it's a tie 39-39, according to Abacus. But it's much easier for the Liberals to win government at 39% support than it is for the Conservatives to win the election at 39% support because of where the support is. You have most of the seats in Ontario and Quebec. That's where the Liberal support is. Just in Ontario, there are something like 123 ridings. In Quebec, you have 78 ridings. Where are the Conservatives most popular? Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. How many ridings? Well, a little more than 60 combined. I think it's 63 ridings combined in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. So you look at some of these polls, it's a tie, doesn't tell the whole story. If Liberal support is concentrated in the eastern part of the country, in the big cities like Montreal and Toronto, Quebec, Ontario, 200 ridings, takes 172 to win a majority government. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. It's Talkback on News Radio. Ernie in Kitchener, you're up next on the election campaign. Share your thoughts, please. What's on your mind, Ernie?
Hey, Rob. Just like from hearing from a lot of the comments and just my own observations. If you go to the CPAC channel on YouTube, I've watched a few of Pierre's rallies. I've watched my ears hurt, but I did watch a Carney rally as well. I want to see the perspective. As much as I want to see what's going on the other side. If you look at the views, and people are talking about numbers, the views of the rallies, Pierre's almost doubling it. Okay, and the first part of the rallies, they both sound the same. They're both canceling the carbon tax. I'm like, man, this is great. They both, it's the same topic that they took from the Conservative Party. Then Carney's rally switches to Trump, just like what you're commenting on, and nothing to address a lot of the major issues we're having. Crime, opiates, stuff like that. Carney has not mentioned or said a word. Now, do we need Pierre to shift the other way a bit to bring more Trump into his topics? Maybe a little bit more, maybe a bit. But the one thing my wife and I we were discussing this, and we don't. It's hard to believe the polls, but I like how you questioned it before too, where you said if the polls the opposite way, nobody ever questioned them before when the Conservatives have that huge lead. And I like when you mention that, just to get the counter perspective. But the more Carney's on the mic, the more people get to see him. It's only hurting himself. And the thing is, I can't stand how the media they're so in favor of this guy, but they're not asking him the hard questions. They're not asking about the crime, like what's he going to do? Is he going to keep? Is he going to repeal the bill? What bill is it? It's Bill C-75, the catch and release. Is he going to repel that? Like, it's Pierre's plan. Is he like none of these questions are being asked to him?
Okay.
But when
Okay.
Well,
he got a pretty rough ride. I will say he got a pretty rough ride about the whole candidate in Markham Unionville suggesting that his rival be taken to the Chinese consulate. The news reporters
you can't
really
ignore that.
taking him.
That's one of those. That's
You
one
can't
of those ones,
ignore
Rob.
that.
You can't ignore that. Like you have to talk about it. And
Sure.
my wife is just what we're seeing also as well is the way he's handling tough questions and questions he doesn't like. You can definitely tell that boardroom tactic where he's the boss and you do as I say. You don't question it. You can feel
he does kind of get rattled. He does. He seems to have a short fuse, right?
And that's where, get him. I wish he opened, and he's not opening many questions. Topics up. Like the last 2 days, there was no media allowed, no questions. We need some more of this stuff and the truth. You'll just be able to see more of it, and that's what I'm praying happens.
All right.
But those are just my thoughts, Rob.
All right. I appreciate you sharing them, Ernie. Let's go to Bob in Calgary. Hello, Bob.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my
Bob.
call, Rob.
You're welcome, Bob.
I think one of the key things that is coming out of all of this recent episode with Trump is that the need for Canada, obviously, to be less dependent on the U.S. markets. I mean, that's been stated a number of times. But I think Poilievre is on the right track in terms of policies to try to deal with that, because basically we need to be able to increase our revenues any way we can. And one of the key sources of revenue is export of energy. We need a lot better egress capacity. And again, that's been stated a number of times, but that all has to do, as Poilievre says, with policies that have limited things. And there's a number of things related to that. So
yes, he spoke at length about that today during his event in New Brunswick, the need for pre-approved energy corridors to expedite projects, whether that's an Energy East pipeline or a Northern Gateway pipeline, that there be a designated corridor for that kind of infrastructure. It's not a new idea, but it's something that he's reviving. Thank you for your call, Bob. If you want to hang on, I'll let you have a few more remarks after the news, but you'll have to hang on through the news. I'm Rob Snow. It's Talkback.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
So we're getting well into the second week of the federal election campaign now here on this Monday. And we're talking about it. Bob in Calgary hung on the line. Thank you, Bob. So you were talking about the need to get energy to other markets. That's something that Poilievre has been pounding away on for a long, long time, as a matter of fact. Right, Bob? Yeah.
Right. My point, though, basically is with respect to his strategy, I think he needs to tie that back to dealing with Trump and tariffs.
Okay.
This is not a separate issue, and that this is how we're going to deal with tariffs and with Trump is by increasing Canada's independence and our, economic sources of revenue rather than anything else. So I think, he just needs to introduce his policies as a means of dealing with Trump and tariffs, that rather than just sort of sitting around worrying about it and hemming and hawing, it's, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, if there are tariffs, we've got to be more independent. Okay, great. How do we do it? Well, here's how we do it. I think people are right, that there's a lot of focus on Trump and tariffs right now, but maybe what Poilievre's missing is to tie it back to his policies. Is that what I'm telling you as Poilievre is this is how we are going to deal with it.
Right.
So
kind of connect the dots, connect the dots, so to speak, right?
Precisely.
Okay.
He's giving us a solution as to how to deal with it rather than a lot of just hot air. But he's perhaps assuming a level of intelligence that people are tying the two things back together, and they're not necessarily happening.
Okay, very interesting. Bob, I'm glad we could get you on and finish your remarks there. To Ayr, Ontario, let's go to Rob in Ayr, Ontario. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, hi, Rob.
Great to hear from you. I appreciate
listener.
that. Yeah, that's very kind.
Yeah, Ayr's just south of Kitchener, in case you were wondering.
Yes, David. David knows it. David knows it well. Yeah, David's been there many times. Yeah.
Good to know. Anyway, full disclosure, I am going to vote Conservative. The issue is, even in our riding, the Cambridge riding, it's so close, and just like a lot of other ridings 3 months ago, it was looking all blue at the time. I think the Conservatives, personally, are not going in the right direction with their message.
Okay.
I've heard or read they're talking about their campaign manager. There's some infighting going on, and that's not good when you have a short campaign like this.
No.
So I think they do have to focus more on Donald Trump, even though you don't want to. But secondary would be what he's doing now. But going out west to BC and talking about TFSAs, a lot of people don't have the money to top up their TFSA. So I'm not sure where
like, is that landing? Like, if you have an extra $7,000 burning a hole in your pocket, you can do this with it. Yeah. Okay. I hear what you're saying there.
Right. And I think most of the votes, as per usual, come out of the GTA. I think they're 50 plus seats, if I'm not mistaken. I've drilled down, I'm interested in this stuff. And, 50-60% vote Liberal. And what's the reason for that? Why are the policies, why do they connect with other regions and outside within Ontario, but more rural and not more in the big cities? So there's got to be something more to it than just what you're hearing. There's got to be some deep-rooted, feelings of, no, I'm just going to vote Liberal. I'll do this or that. And we also have, got to watch what I say, but newcomers coming. And my parents immigrated to Canada back in the 50s. And I think it was under Diefenbaker, if I'm not mistaken, but the election came, and it's like, well, I'm voting for him. He let us in. He was a great guy and a great country and all that. I think that has a little bit to do.
Maybe.
If I'm walking the tightrope, okay.
No, I think that's fine. I think you're in pretty safe territory there. But I do thank you for your call, and thank you for being a first-time caller. I mean, you raise some really interesting points about the dynamic in Ontario, because I mean, the Conservatives have been hoping for a solid performance everywhere Doug Ford managed to do well in his 3 elections in Ontario, in the so-called Ford Nation. That's why it is so stinging. The very loud criticism of the Poilievre campaign is so stinging because it's coming from someone like Corey Teneycke, who ran Doug Ford's last 3 election campaigns, but was also an advisor to Stephen Harper when he was prime minister. And look at, whatever you think of Doug Ford, he has a great track record at winning elections in Ontario. And Corey Teneycke just ran an election campaign and won big time by doing what? Pumping the heck out of the Donald Trump issue. That election in Ontario was not a traditional provincial election campaign. The PCs made it all about Trump, all about tariffs, all about looking tough against Trump. They were all over the American cable news networks. Doug Ford did more interviews with American news outlets than he did with anybody in the Ontario media. His opponents in the Liberals and the New Democrats tried to make it about other issues, traditional provincial issues, healthcare, public education, and failed badly. The Liberal leader didn't even win her own seat on election night. So you have this clarion call going out from one of Ford's top people that if Poilievre doesn't change his message, he's going to lose. He has too many messages. The Trump message is not a big enough priority. And these people are saying it should be his only priority. It is certainly a line of thinking that is out there, getting a lot of traction. We've been exploring it today with your help on Talkback. This is News Radio. Back to British Columbia and Peter in Langley on the election campaign. Hello, Peter.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, Peter.
Hey, Looking at these two guys, I would say that when I look at Carney, I am not convinced that we're looking at more Trudeau. And when I say that, I don't mean him acting as much like Trudeau, as much as Trudeau being involved, like a advisor or that kind of thing. And I think Trudeau is the worst prime minister this country has ever had by far. And if I have an inkling that Trudeau is going to be involved, there's not a chance I would vote for Carney. When I look at Poilievre, I'm not convinced that he's just going to sell us out to the U.S. And what I mean by that is that he'll make some kind of deal that is, going to put us right back to where we were before, where we take our orders from the U.S. and they do whatever they want and we just accept it. And if I was going to speak to their campaign, for the Carney people, I think that their message ought to be that Poilievre is going to sell us out and keep us under the U.S. thumb.
Okay.
And for the Conservatives, I would say that Carney equals more Trudeau. And I think so. The issue to me boils down not so much about housing and pipelines and all that stuff. It comes down, are we going to have more Trudeau, or who's going to be willing to rewrite the relationship with the U.S.? And last week, Friday, we played that clip, or you played that clip, that Carney had said that this, relationship, like security,
it's over.
Military,
it's over. The relationship we had is over. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that got my heart pounding. The chance to stand up and become a equal partner, not a junior partner in this relationship. That excites me, but not if it's going to be more Trudeau. If there's any Trudeau in there, I'll vote for Jagmeet Singh before I vote for Carney.
Okay, well, you'd be one of the few, apparently. Okay, Peter, thank you. Thank you. Omar in Ottawa up next. Hi,
hey,
Omar.
Rob, how are you?
Good, Omar. What do you think?
So, Rob, you kind of stole my thunder about the whole Doug Ford thing. And the funny thing is, I think Pierre and Doug Ford don't like each other at all. I think Pierre doesn't like Doug Ford, but Pierre needs to run the Doug Ford playbook, because Doug Ford, he ran a masterclass. He ran a masterclass in the simple election. He knows when people don't like to hear something, he changes his campaign. And Pierre does not know how to pivot. He needs to pivot. He needs to make it about Trump.
Okay.
And the thing is, Pierre does not want, it seems like Pierre doesn't want Trump to hate him, because he's not going very hard at Trump. Like he's got a couple of things that's like against Trump, but not to the point where, like Doug Ford, he took the gloves off. Like, I'm so proud of Doug Ford, man. And
really?
That's why Doug Ford is not helping him in Ontario right now. Like
so you would like Pierre Poilievre, I'm sorry, Omar, you want Pierre Poilievre to sound more like Doug Ford?
Absolutely, because that's what Canadians want to hear.
That's what Canadians want to hear. Okay.
Because there's Doug Ford, he's like, yo, I supported Trump. He stabbed us in the back, and now I hate him. Like, Doug Ford, he basically said what Canadians are saying. Because you know what? Trump was like, when he was being elected, no one wanted Kamala. But the funny thing is, if Kamala would have won, Pierre Poilievre would have probably 200-seat majority right now. You see what I'm saying? He needs to pivot his campaign and stop that. Also, Pierre Poilievre is too much of an attack dog. He has to be more prime ministerial. Like he's called, sellout thing and carbon. He needs to stop the nicknames. That's not what a prime minister does.
All right. Got you, Omar. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you. Now, look, David, I should point out that there are some who are questioning Omar's line of thinking, that it would be a mistake for Poilievre to pivot too much. One of them is David Coletto. And again, a reminder, you're going to interview David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data, for the Big Story podcast. When is that going to be out, the Big Story podcast? Tomorrow morning?
That will be for tomorrow's Big Story podcast. On
tomorrow
Tuesday.
Morning. It'll drop early tomorrow morning, right? Yeah. So listen to that. David points out, David Coletto, not David Smith, but David Coletto points out, look, the desire for change among voters is still strong, and that's material to work with. He had a poll out yesterday, and it shows still more than half of the voters want a change in government. And Poilievre's been very good at prosecuting that case, that he's the agent for change. That whether it's Mark Carney or Trudeau, it's just more of the same. Look around at the Liberal team. It's all the same people. And the thinking goes like this: Trump is one of many issues on the campaign, but it's far from the only issue. Change and a desire for change, that's an issue. But also, David Smith, cost of living, right? Still a huge issue. Housing affordability, price of groceries, paying utility, affording the basics. For some cohorts or demographics, those very basic pocketbook issues are the issues, and they rank higher on lists of concerns than tariffs and Trump. I have that right? Yes.
Tariffs and Trump. Yes. As a caller pointed out earlier this hour, Rob, the demographics with which affordability is a larger concern than Trump, that's people roughly aged 30 to 60, younger Gen X and millennials. That's the biggest voting bloc in the country. There are more of them than other demographics.
There are more of them. Yeah, many polls have shown the cost of living is the issue for millions of Canadian voters, and it's, again, been Poilievre who's been kind of prosecuting that case for the better part of 2 years. That seems to be how things are kind of breaking right now with the Conservative campaign. We can talk a little bit about the Liberals and take more of your calls. So when we come back to Marcel up next on Talkback, as we talk about week 2 now underway in the federal election campaign. Hi, Marcel.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, very good to hear from you, Marcel.
Great show.
Thank you so much. Very kind of
think-
you to say.
I think that Canadians are totally out to lunch.
Okay.
Trump is not the problem. On
Okay.
Wednesday, tariffs will go around the world. He's not just doing it to Canada. And Canada is only 41 million people, and we won't be able to fight an economy of 350 million people next door. I prefer the approach by Daniel Smith, who says negotiation as opposed to retaliation. We won't be able to do it. Whatever we think about sovereignty, we won't be able to do it. We're too small a population. We cannot do it. The real issue that should be talked about by Pierre Poilievre is the 9 years of failed liberal policies that have crippled this country.
Okay.
Carney was an advisor, and he's not going to do anything different. The same people are in the cabinet, or if he wins, and it's the same party. The same policies are going to be tweaked here and there, but the same problems are going to exist.
So you would say to Poilievre, stick the course, talk about the Liberal record, talk about the other issues, cost of living, and avoid this advice that says you have to talk about Trump, 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 and only Trump. Is that what you would say?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Trump
All right.
Trump is not a Canadian problem. Trump is a worldwide problem. The UK is already negotiating with him. We will have to negotiate. The world will negotiate with him. It's the biggest economy in the world. They run the show.
All right, Marcel, thank you. Thank you. Very, very interesting, sir. Analysis. And Dan Veer, this will be the last call for the Monday Talkback. Squeeze Dan Veer in here. Only 2 minutes, so let's go.
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
Okay, so about the Trump thing, right? So
yes.
I would say it's what Poilievre doing is good, because Trump would bringing Trump in would be the most uncertain thing, right? So you don't know which way it's going to go, and that's an external issue. And none of our leaders are traitors, so none of them is going to sell us off. And this would be a more comprehensive procedure to deal with the tariff situation after the elections. So, like, one person does not steer, like they would steer, but they are not the only decision makers when they're dealing with this situation, right? And after the elections, so that's basically what I'm trying to say.
All right, Dan Veer, and now you have said it, and I thank you so much, and I'm glad we could squeeze you in and take all of your calls today with week 2 now well underway. Tomorrow is going to be a big day for the election campaign. I'm going to be curious to see if the carbon tax plays out at all tomorrow on the hustings, whether it comes up, what it does to gas prices. Tomorrow, the carbon tax was supposed to go up 18%. But of course, that is not going to happen now because the Carney Liberals have come along and they said, no, the carbon tax, forget about the carbon tax that we supported for 6 years. It doesn't exist anymore. I'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow. Lots of news to report on today, bring you right up to date. Coming right up is the latest breaking news. I'm Rob Snow. This is News Radio.